Brass players spend a lot of time working with just the mouthpiece, buzzing and slurring and so forth, but saxophone players can also benefit greatly from playing with just the mouthpiece. It helps to isolate the embouchure, the tongue, and the throat muscles, and it requires them to work together to produce a focused tone. And once you get a focused tone, then you can work on things like pitch flexibility, playing a glissando, bending notes, improve your intonation. Overall, it's just a great way to train your voicing to hit notes more accurately and to be more in control of pitch. And before we go any further, just a quick side note, if you are completely unfamiliar with the concept of voicing, you might want to check out my video on that topic first. I believe it's called Voicing and Overtones Lesson for Saxophone. I'll put a link in the description. The first step is to play a single note on the mouthpiece. Don't worry too much about what pitch it is yet. We'll get to that later. Just want to get a sound. So set your embouchure, and with your cheeks firm, your throat open and relaxed, blow a full steady stream of air, not just into but through the mouthpiece forward, like so. So hopefully that worked and you got a sound. If not, don't worry, we can diagnose the problem. Number 1, air. Check your airstream. Are you blowing a full, steady stream of air from deep down in your gut, in your belly? If you're not, you might get no sound at all, or you might just get a sound that's really weak and thin or kind of goes in and out, like this. Number 2, your bottom lip. Check your bottom lip and how much pressure it's putting against the reed, which is controlled by your jaw moving up and down. We want to find that sweet spot right in the middle where the reed is really allowed to resonate well. If you're too loose down here, you'll get no sound at all. Too loose. If you're too tight, if you're squeezing, you'll get a sound that's really unstable and shaky, pinched, and thin sounding, like this. That's too tight. I'm biting and squeezing here too much. So again, we want to find that sweet spot somewhere in the middle where the reed really resonates. Number 3, your cheeks. Check your cheeks. If you're puffing them, you're going to be losing a lot of air that should be going forward into the mouthpiece. You need that air. Watch and listen what happens here. Obviously, you can see and hear what happens there. If I puff my cheeks too much, I can lose the sound completely or just not get a very good tone through the mouthpiece. And lastly, check the amount of mouthpiece that you're taking in your mouth. That's important too. If your teeth are biting down right here, right on the tip, that's not enough mouthpiece. You're going to get this. Either nothing or just some squeaks maybe. And if your teeth are biting down way up here, you've got way too much mouthpiece in your mouth. You're going to get this. Some horrible duck slaughtering noise. I don't know. So where you want to be is in the middle, or probably a little bit further down from the middle. Probably no more than halfway up the slope of the mouthpiece. So in this area, somewhere between here and here is where you want to be biting down. So if you've gone through and checked all those things and you got them working, you should be getting a sound by now when you play. You're still not getting any sound at all when you blow through the mouthpiece. You may just need to review the fundamentals of a good embouchure, of air support. You may need to check your equipment. You might have the reed or the ligature on incorrectly. You could be playing a reed that's way too hard. It could be any number of things. So the driving point of these exercises, and the most important thing about working with the mouthpiece, is that we're training our tongue to become the mechanism that locates and changes pitches by moving the airstream direction around. Not so much the bottom lip, not the jaw and the bottom part of the embouchure, not that. We don't want... That's just too unstable. We can't be moving our embouchure around so drastically when we play. So again, the tongue directing the airstream is what should be the first line of defense for manipulating pitch. So the back part of my tongue moving around is what's allowing me to do that, just like when I whistle. So now what we want to do is figure out what note's coming out when you blow into the mouthpiece. And this is going to vary from player to player. So you want to go to the piano or use a tuner or a pitch reference of some kind and use it to figure out what note you're blowing through the mouthpiece. Now at this point you might be saying to me, well, all right man, what's correct? What's the right note? What pitch should I be producing when I blow into the mouthpiece? Is there a correct one? Well, that brings us to a somewhat contentious issue in the saxophone world. A lot of saxophone players and teachers argue that each saxophone mouthpiece has its own default tuning pitch, one for soprano, alto, tenor, and baritone. And if you don't play that exact tuning pitch when you blow into the mouthpiece, it means that there's something wrong with your embouchure and your voicing. I'm going to put those pitches up here on the screen so you know exactly what I'm talking about. These ideas come mostly from classical saxophonists like Eugene Rousseau and Donald Sinta. And they sort of have been transmitted and disseminated throughout the years by the students of these great saxophone educators. I have absolutely no quarrel whatsoever with Donald Sinta or Eugene Rousseau. I think they're both absolutely fantastic saxophonists. But I don't think we need to view these default tuning pitches as absolute gospel. I view them more just as kind of general guidelines, and I'll tell you why. For the alto saxophone mouthpiece, the note that's considered the correct tuning pitch is an A 2 octaves above middle C on the piano. That's the beginning of the altissimo register for saxophone, for alto saxophone. So it just feels a bit narrow and inflexible to me to say that we're going to pick one standard pitch that's going to be the default tuning pitch for everybody on every mouthpiece. After all, mouthpieces, as we know, come in a vast array of different sizes. There's different chambers, facings, tip openings, baffles. That's going to affect the pitch. Everybody's lips, tongues, teeth, oral cavity all have different dimensions and sizes. That's also going to affect the pitch. Not to mention the fact that the amount of mouthpiece that you take in your mouth, changing that even just a little bit, we're talking a couple of millimeters, is also going to affect the pitch that comes out of it. See, I'm barely moving there, yet the pitch is changing pretty significantly. Now, if you're practicing with the mouthpiece, and you find that the note that you naturally blow into it is well above that high concert A that we talked about, well, that could be the sign of an issue. If you're getting something way up here that's really high and squeaky. That could mean one of several things. It could mean that your embouchure is too tight. It could mean you have tension in your throat, or that your voicing is incorrect. Probably that your voicing is too high, your tongue position. Or it could be any combination of those things. So if you find that to be true, and you also find that you consistently play too sharp with your normal saxophone playing, or if you don't like your tone, if you're squeaking a lot, that could mean that it really benefits you to lower that pitch, that standard pitch you get down to the concert A, or perhaps even the A flat right below it. But again, that won't be true for everyone. If you're consistently playing a third, a fourth, or even a fifth below that high concert A into the mouthpiece, I don't necessarily think that means there's an issue with your voicing or your embouchure. Could be fine. Now, I will say that if you're consistently playing flat in your normal saxophone playing, and you've tried everything else, if you've pushed the mouthpiece down the cork, slightly harder reeds, a slightly firmer embouchure, moving your voicing more from that ah to e tongue position, talking to Adolph Sax in your sleep. If you've tried all of that and you're still flat, well, then it could be time to do some work with the mouthpiece and try and raise your default pitch closer up to that high concert A. That could probably benefit you in that case. You know, I suspect that what we could be running into here is just the difference in jazz and classical saxophone voicing concepts. They are a little bit different after all. So I did some digging, some investigating. What I did, I read some papers, I talked to some people, I watched some videos, I looked around, and it turns out that one doctoral student at the University of Illinois actually made this the topic of her dissertation. She really went into great detail researching it. By it, I mean the difference in jazz and classical saxophone mouthpiece tuning pitches. So here's a couple of quotes from that research, which was done on a variety of different test subjects. However, insufficient scientific documentation exists relative to mouthpiece pitch and characteristic jazz tone quality. One of the reasons for this may be that the range of acceptable jazz tone qualities is much broader than the range of acceptable classical tone qualities. Nevertheless, creating a general guideline will be beneficial. So I think that's very revealing. We also have this next quote. When striving unsuccessfully for an alto saxophone jazz tone quality, removing the saxophone mouthpiece to check the mouthpiece pitch may be of help. If the mouthpiece pitch is equal to or higher than the A5 recommended for a classical tone quality, often simply lowering the pitch will assist the player in approximating the desired sound. So that was Vanessa Hasbrook's research from the University of Illinois, which is coincidentally where I did my master's degree. Shout out Urbana-Champaign. So if you want to dig deeper into that stuff, I highly recommend you check out that research. It really goes into great detail about mouthpiece tuning pitches, jazz and classical voicing, all of that. It's really great. I'll put a link in the description for that. So I definitely agree with Hasbrook on both of these counts, with both of those quotes I put up on the screen. And what I take from the first one especially is that it really is true that there's not really enough research, documentation, justification, or reason behind establishing a few pitches as the ideal defaults for tuning saxophone mouthpieces. That those have to be the pitches for every saxophonist on every mouthpiece, everywhere, all the time. It's just a bit too rigid and arbitrary. And those pitches just happen to have been chosen by a couple of really well-known and successful saxophone pedagogues and spread around and established, and here we are. But again, I kind of just view them more as general guidelines that can be beneficial if used correctly, or if tailored to the individual needs of each saxophone player. So, feel free to sound off in the comments and tell me why you think I'm wrong about this. I definitely welcome other opinions on this subject. In fact, I'm not even married to my own opinion. I could change mine in a year or two. Who knows? I might learn something new. I'm just trying to figure out the best way to use the mouthpiece to get better control over voicing and pitch. God! So I'll just move on from this part of the video by saying that if you are a classical saxophonist, maybe it is a good idea to go ahead and try and hit that high concert A tuning pitch as your sort of go-to, your default, or the G on tenor mouthpiece and so forth, just to get a more characteristically classical saxophone sound. Maybe a little bit thinner, not as harmonically thick and dense and rich. Because after all, if you are blowing a much lower note than that high A into the mouthpiece, that means you have a lower voicing, and when you play the saxophone, the fundamental notes that you produce are going to have a richer, fuller harmonic spectrum vibrating above them when you play. I really hope that makes acoustic sense the way I just tried to explain it. It does to me. It's like the difference in singing the same note, but accentuating different parts of the harmonic spectrum, equalizing it differently. Like if I sing this note, oh, it's the same note, right? But the tone sounds different as I accentuate different parts of the registers. And if it sounded like I was knocking classical saxophone playing, I really wasn't, I promise. I really respect that kind of playing, the tradition, the repertoire, the players. I used to play a lot of classical saxophone myself. I still play a little bit of it, even though what I mostly do now is jazz and blues, funk, rock, and pop kind of playing. But it's true that the classical saxophone sound is just a little bit more specific, we could say, than a jazz sound. And if you take more of a jazz approach to playing the saxophone, I think it's totally fine if you just don't worry about hitting that high concert A tuning pitch on the alto mouthpiece, or G for tenor and so forth. As long as you like your sound, you like what's going on with your tone and your intonation and everything, I just wouldn't worry about being a second, third, fourth, or even a fifth below that. Because as we learned from the Holbrook quote earlier, and many others have said this, and I happen to agree, jazz just allows for more variation of tone quality. In my view, obsessing over hitting one standardized, exact tuning pitch per mouthpiece is kind of missing the whole point of working with the mouthpiece in the first place. I think it should be about being able to hit different pitches and hitting them cleanly and in tune, and then being able to move in between them. And to be fair, both classical and jazz saxophone players, or merengue saxophone players, or salsa players, funk, polka, whatever, as saxophone players, we're all concerned with developing flexibility and pitch control with the mouthpiece and the horn, whether or not we use the recommended tuning pitches. If you want to know, I myself blow somewhere around an E concert when I play into the mouthpiece. Works for me. So I just wanted to punch in here really quick and update some information that I gave before about Donald Sinta and Eugene Rousseau. I went back and read through Sinta's book. It's called Voicing. Really excellent. I think that you should all check it out. It's got great information. But in the book, Sinta doesn't actually suggest that the high concert A is the only default tuning pitch and you have to hit it or you're doing something wrong. He doesn't say that. He says you should start with that high concert A on alto mouthpiece and then gradually work your way down to other pitches with your voicing and your tongue position to get flexibility. So maybe I wasn't being fair to Sinta earlier. He wasn't saying in some dictatorial fashion that this is the pitch and the only pitch. I just kind of have found that it's the students of some of those teachers, of teachers like Sinta and Rousseau, that have gone on and maybe taken the ideas a little bit too seriously and said that, yes, these are the pitches you have to hit on your mouthpiece. And that's it. So there's my little addendum. Moving on. We've already gone through everything that needs to happen for you to be able to play individual notes on your mouthpiece. So once you can do that, once you can find and hold pitches consistently and more or less in tune, the next step is to try and gain pitch flexibility and be able to bend notes around. This is where we want to put our knowledge of voicing to good use, to get that middle to back part of our tongue really moving around, to get flexibility. So we can either do the ah to e syllable change to make the tongue move, ah, e, ah, e, ah, e, or we can use the whistling technique where we whistle a low note and then slide it to a high one and back and forth. Whatever you have to do to really get that back part of the tongue sliding around. So once you can do that, then put your mouthpiece back in, blow a note, and just try to get some range. Not just the whole step or a minor third, but really try and bend it around with your tongue. So once you gain some flexibility and can slide around like that, the next step is to try to be able to change between individual notes, between exact pitches, to try and play scales and arpeggios and increase your range. So here are some mouthpiece exercises that you can do 5 to 10 minutes every day to get you started. I'm using a Van Doren V16 mouthpiece for this, alto mouthpiece, if you care to know. You can do these along with me in the video, or you can just do them on your own. But either way, I really recommend that you start by just slurring these with the back of the tongue. No tip of the tongue articulation, no ta at the front of each note. You really want to keep the focus on the back part of your tongue sliding around to find the pitches. So kind of building off of that Donald Sinta quote from earlier, we're going to start with the high concert A reference pitch and then work our way down the A major scale. Here we go. So there's just a few ideas of exercises that you can do with your mouthpiece. I'm sure if you set your mind to it, you can come up with some really great ones on your own. And remember, this is probably going to be a long-term thing for you to develop. It's not going to happen overnight. So be patient with it, warm up with it a little bit every day, 5-10 minutes, and really train yourself not to move your jaw and your bottom lip around too much when you're trying to change pitches. You want to let the back of your tongue be the thing that does that. All right, so to summarize everything at the end here, you want to start by just blowing one note at a time into the mouthpiece. Use a tuner or a piano to help you figure out what note it is that you naturally blow into the mouthpiece to see where your voicing is. Everybody's going to be just a little bit different. If you find that the note you naturally blow is really, really high, like well above those reference tuning pitches that we talked about earlier, you might want to consider lowering it to the tuning pitch, or maybe just a second or a third below it even. That's up to you. As I said before, I kind of view those reference pitches just as general guidelines. And then from there, to gain pitch flexibility, you practice changing it between individual notes, playing scales, arpeggios, intervals, maybe even little pieces of songs or melodies. With a little bit of daily practice, it can improve everything from your pitch, your tone, your voicing, your ability to play a glissando, bend a note, play a smear, everything like that. That's all I got for you.